The strings carried them across the ballroom, weaving in and out of polished statues. They were surrounded by everything and everyone they'd ever cared about. Yet, Arendt could only see Parnese. Arendt's wife was her muse. Her smile outshone the brightest spotlight. It was more perfect than her hand could ever hope to capture in ink. The world was perfect. Then, a shadow fell over New Capenna. A glass of wine spilled on the floor, the liquid flowing into an unnatural symbol with a nearly complete circle and a line through the center. Happy smiles turned to hungry grins, and they urged the maestros to join them without words. The celebration ceased to be about Arendt and Parnese. Now it was for the twisted union of all of them condensing into singularity. Even her father, Anello, had been transformed, but her wife was oblivious. Was she not seeing what Arendt was? She told Parnese they had to go, trying to explain what she couldn't understand. Then there was a low rumble heralding death and war. The sky streaked with crimson as plated branches tore budding stars asunder. They drilled into the foundations of New Capenna. Then the roof of the Maestro's museum was ripped off, like a present coming undone in the hands of a child. Arendt stared up in horror at the monster that was Atraxa, larger than life. With a clawed hand, the corrupted angel reached forward, and Parnese let out a scream. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you more Magic the Gathering lore. Today we continue the story of March of the Machine. As previews for this set starts, the lore continues on to show the consequences of the Phyrexian invasion of the multiverse. In our previous chapter, we watched painfully as Ren managed to fuse with the invasion tree, her 8th companion. Though it stretched her being beyond measure, Ren managed to open a portal to Zolfir, gathering Teferi and his people to join the fight on New Phyrexia. Now we again turn to the multiverse. Battles raged on outside of New Phyrexia as people struggled for survival. We return to the city plane of New Capenna, where we last saw Atraxa wreaking havoc. Her orders? Let none survive their cleansing. But then even Archangel Elspeth knows New Capenna is strong enough to defend itself. The only question is, how? Remember, if you're enjoying our content, throw this video a like, become a subscriber, and share it with others. Now let's continue on with March of the Machine's story with Chapter 14, New Capenna, The Fall of Park Heights, by Alice Kova. Arendt jolted awake in the corner of an abandoned train station, Parnese's scream still ringing in her ears. She hadn't intended to fall asleep, but sneaking around under the noses of the Phyrexian invaders had taken its toll. They'd paid in blood to make it out alive. Now they had a chance to tend to their wounds and rest. Arendt realizes Parnese's scream hadn't entirely been a dream. Their pursuer caught up with them. A Phyrexian converter beast crashed through a wall. Dust settled in the spine of its back, and through the haze, they could see sharp injectors dripping glistening oil on the end of its tails. Arendt had been maneuvering around the city for some time now, but she had always used safe and secret pathways. This was the first time she was seeing a Phyrexian up close, the monsters that had turned her father. Parnese grabbed her hand and they took off running, carrying 2 satchels full of explosives they had stolen from an old riveter stash. Arendt glances at the bag flapping at Parnese's hip. The monster chased them through a collapsed wall of a streetcar station, emerging onto a high track over the street that had been interrupted by the invasion tree. Ever since the Phyrexians had returned, New Capenna had been fighting a losing battle. They were refugees in their own home. Not an hour went by where a building or burnt-out structure wasn't collapsing, or flashes of magic weren't bursting through the night. There wasn't even time to mourn the dead and dying. The converted beast shook the railing as it plunged through the rubble, no doubt tracking them by the trail of blood Parnese was leaving behind her. Arendt led her wife across the rails. On the other side was another streetcar station. The archway ahead was full of graffiti, reading "Danger." Arendt leapt for the ledge of a nearby building, spinning around to extend her hands to Parnese. Parnese struggled, relying mostly on her good leg to make the jump, but Arendt caught her and pulled her close. The beast tried to jump after them, but the ledge was too narrow, and it tumbled to the street below with a thud. If only a fall like that was enough to kill a Phyrexian, but they had to make use of the opportunity to slip away while it was merely dazed. Running from converter beasts wasn't much different for their life, much like Arendt running from broker enforcers. in contrast to Parnese's art studio where she painted in relative safety. They hopped across 3 more balconies and down a fire escape, Parnese keeping up without complaint. But now the tagger's scrawl had vanished. Whoever had marked the route they followed had ended their graffiti here. Errant asked how Parnese was holding up, seeing the blood soaking through the bandages she'd hastily wrapped barely an hour ago. The wound had opened up again, so Errant tore off the remaining sleeve and wrapped Parnese's thigh, assuring her the meeting point was not far away. Before they could head down the alley, they heard the growl of a converter beast looming on a nearby rooftop. Then, behind them, they heard the roar of the beast that had been chasing them, ready to envelop them in the cage on its back and convert them into phyrexian minions. Parnese reached into Errant's bag, taking out an explosive, then pressed it into her hand. It was very close quarters. One explosion would be enough to take down the whole building. They had made a promise to one another to never become one of those things, and there was no other way out. Errant pulled her wife in for a brief but fierce kiss. Then, they pressed the detonator together. No matter what, they would be together until the final moment. They threw the bomb together, and an explosion rang across New Capenna. Sensations returned slowly, and Errant cracked open her eyes. As the room came into focus, she saw her paints and sprayers lining the walls. She reached out to the empty side of the bed where her wife would be. Errant was on her feet, striding to the common room of the old Riveters headquarters her unlikely team had claimed for their own. She was greeted by an angel, with 2 iridescent wings extending gracefully from her back. Errant had only ever seen statues of angels, but the stewards of New Capenna had returned. She was afraid they had returned too late. The angel led her to Parnese. She was still alive, but wounded. They'd both been gravely wounded, but the angel used her halo to heal their wounds as best she could. Halo was one of the most powerful magics the angels had, capable of restoring their corporeal forms. Halo could slow down phyrexian conversion, but it wasn't a cure. The angel introduced herself as Della, explaining that Perry, an agent of the brokers, had convinced her to join them. Perry the Rocks wore a monocle comically small for his face, and sat at a table with the cephalid Camiz, who had been one of the Obscura's spy masters. Henzi the Devil, that had been a thief for the Riveters, emerged from his workshop and joined their argument about who was left to fight the invaders. The families were leading the resistance the best they could, but they hadn't gotten far. Henzi told them they had found the core of the city. They could go there and use the explosives to bring down all of Park Heights on the invaders' heads. He called it Operation Falling Star. The 3 of them tried to convince Errant that she should be the one to make the journey and put the charges in place. Errant argued that Camiz should do the job. She wasn't risking her life or Parnese's anymore. Parnese walked into the room with a slight limp, telling Errant her life was not her decision. She wanted to keep fighting. Perry asked if she was in, and Errant had to agree. The families couldn't be counted on to keep New Capenna safe, so someone else had to. They had to. They all had different opinions on which families had or hadn't helped New Capenna survive, so Errant chose not to say more. They were heading into stage 2 of this plan, where Falco Spara would get the attention of Atraxa and lead her into Park Heights. Falco, the head of the Brokers family, had been the only one to be able to catch the Phyrexian Angel's attention. The rest of them were inconsequential to her. Della would give Errant the signal when Atraxa was in position, and it was time to detonate. Henzi would report to the dragon, Zayatora, who was the head of the Riveters, and tell her they all agreed to work together to save the remaining beauty that was New Capenna. It took a few days to get everyone on the same page. Some things never changed, like convincing the 5 families to work together, even when they shared a common enemy. At last, they had worked out the details. The Riveters had gone ahead, reinforcing everything around Park Heights to create a safe zone. Falco and his brokers were in position, as the other families rallied around them. Della had gathered the angels while Errant scoped 2 routes, one for herself and one for Parnese to shepherd the remaining citizens into the safe zone. As she made her way along the rooftops, Errant caught glimpses of them. With any luck, she'd see everyone again when this war was over. She carried jars filled with the mixture of paint and halo, throwing them to distract the converter beasts away from the escaping citizens. She threw a jar right into the mouth of one of the beasts, exploding halo paint everywhere and coloring the white bones of the beast's face. This fight would be her masterpiece. She'd bought Parnis and the other citizens some time, and now she had to worry about herself. Another converter beast ambushed her as she took out a paint sprayer and covered the monster in an iridescent kaleidoscope of color. It reared and tumbled back onto the streets below, the air vibrating with magic as the halo ricocheted between buildings. A beast like that had nearly ended her and Parnis's lives. Now she held the power of the angels in her hands, and these monsters would fear her instead. Errant made her way deep into the core of New Capenna, a support structure the Riveters had built underneath the entire city. She placed the explosives exactly where Henzi had instructed her and turned to leave. But a figure stood in her path. It was her father, Anello, the vampire who had once been the head of the Maestro family, but who now stood there, a devout follower of Atraxa. This wasn't the man she knew. Pale plates had replaced parts of his body, and red sinew climbed up his neck from behind them. Parts of his flesh had been hollowed out, creating a void where his heart had been. He was a mockery of the man who had raised her. But Errant still wanted to hold him and seek comfort for the girl within that still wept for the loss of her father. He rasped her name, but she warned the Phyrexian not to speak with her father's voice, and reached for her sprayer. He wanted to show her the beauty of New Phyrexia, telling her that their glorious future was one single stroke of brilliance rather than many. He believed it, every word. But beauty was not found in coloring within the lines, or in a single color, or a single stroke. Beauty was mess and experimentation, failure and triumph, pushing the boundaries of what is known. It was originality. Errant's finger trembled on the nozzle, but she couldn't do it. The sky lit up in an explosion of halo, Della's sign. Errant had to act now. Anello lunged for her and she jumped for a lower window, taking out the detonator. She said goodbye to her father, letting herself fall past the beams of the core, and pressed the button. Everything above her burst into orange flame and Park Heights began to crumble into dust. She landed on a ledge, rolling and scrambling to her feet, and ran through the crumbling chaos. If Atraxa wanted New Capenna, she would have it shoved down her throat in a million pieces. Then, they would rebuild the city into something better than before. Errant pushed herself to her physical limit, trying to outrun the collapse. The safe zone wasn't too much further. She jumped, but her hands missed the railing she was reaching for. Miraculously, Della caught her while dodging debris. There was a loud rumble and a shot of magic rippled through the city that shimmered with halo. The branches of the invasion tree began to shrivel, retreating back through the portals. They had responded both to the magic of the angels as well as the fall of their forlorn leader. Atraxa here commanded the Phyrexians on New Capenna. With her demise in the collapse of Park Heights, they no longer led in an orderly direction. The angels were being unleashed into the multiverse, taking their halo with them. They would pour through this portal to fight on the damned plane where the Phyrexians had come. She heard someone call her name and she turned to see Perry, Henzi, Camiz, and most importantly, Parnis. She would savor the memory of her wife sprinting toward her for the rest of her days, knowing a brush or sprayer could never replicate this beauty. Parnis threw herself into Errant's arms as they watched Della join the angels charging through the portals, feeling, for the first time in weeks, a sense of hope. And there you guys go, the latest in our coverage of the March of the Machine story. Returning to New Capenna, we get a better look of how the invasion fared from the perspective of the inhabitants here. In a previous story, we saw from Atraxa's point of view, which was nothing short of a slaughter. But here, the 5 families found hope working together along with the lost angels, who had come to the city's defense once again. I guess that's RIP for Atraxa. Sad to see such an imposing figure taken out without much fanfare. I know Elish Norn had sent Atraxa here because the city weakened Phyrexians, and she was really the only one strong enough to possibly get the job done. In this weakened state, however, the halo just proved too much, and everyone's favorite Phyrexian angel commander is lost to history, crumbled by a building. What the New Capennans did was nothing short of a miracle. They not only fended off the Phyrexian invasion, but also reversed the portals of the invasion tree and sent their own angelic force through it to fight on New Phyrexia itself. Elspeth was right. This city can protect itself. The angels proved how they managed to fight back this threat once before, and to this day, they remain the bane of Phyrexia. Anyway guys, that's gonna do it for today's video. Remember, if you enjoyed it, consider supporting the channel by leaving it a like, becoming a subscriber or a member of the channel, dropping a super thanks, and of course sharing it with your friends. It all goes a long way in helping us grow this community. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time guys, see ya!